There was a time when everything felt like it was crumbling beneath their feet. Not in the dramatic way that stories often describe, but in the quiet, exhausting way that real life tends to unfold. They would wake up already tired, carry the weight of unspoken fears through their day, and fall asleep with a mind that refused to quiet down. These weren't just bad days strung together. They were the kind of prolonged seasons that change a person fundamentally, that force them to question everything they thought they knew about themselves and what they were capable of handling. In those moments of sudden upheaval, they found themselves overwhelmed in ways they couldn't articulate to anyone. The people around them saw someone functioning, perhaps even succeeding in certain areas, but beneath that surface was a person drowning in their own silence. They felt drained not just physically, but in that deep, soul-level way that sleep cannot fix. And emotionally, they existed in a state of low-grade despair, a persistent grayness that colored every interaction, every decision, every attempt at connection. They had become masters at hiding this. The mask they wore was crafted over years of believing that vulnerability was weakness, that admitting struggle was the same as admitting failure. So they smiled when expected, performed their roles with convincing precision, and convinced themselves that if they just tried harder, the darkness would eventually lift on its own. But it didn't. It couldn't. Because the problem wasn't their effort. The problem was that they were trying to heal wounds they wouldn't even acknowledge existed. This is where your path intersects with theirs in ways neither of you fully understood at the time. You entered their life not as a savior, because that's not how real healing works, but as a mirror. You reflected back to them possibilities they had long ago dismissed as unrealistic. You carried a light that made their shadows visible, and while that exposure was uncomfortable, it was also the first real chance they had at genuine transformation. The mask they wore around you was different from the one they showed the world. With you, they allowed glimpses of truth to slip through. They laughed in ways that surprised them, felt safe enough to be silent without performing, and occasionally, rarely at first, shared thoughts they had never spoken aloud. But even then, the mask remained. They couldn't fully remove it because they didn't know who existed underneath anymore. Years of performance had eroded their sense of authentic self, leaving them uncertain of which reactions were genuine and which were habitual. When the separation came, whether through circumstance or choice, it created a fracture in their carefully constructed defenses. At first, they tried to maintain the mask even in your absence. They told themselves they were fine, that this was just another transition to navigate with the same tools they'd always used. But something had shifted. Your absence wasn't like other absences. It created a space that demanded to be filled with truth rather than distraction. This is where the first card reveals its significance. The mask is falling, and this fall is not gentle. It is the collapse of an identity they had invested everything in maintaining. They are discovering that the persona of someone who doesn't care, who remains unaffected, who moves through relationships without attachment, that persona is crumbling. And in its crumbling, they are finally meeting themselves. They care. They care more than they have words for. They care in ways that frighten them because caring means risk, and risk means potential loss, and loss is something they have never learned to process in healthy ways. So they built systems of protection that kept everyone at arm's length, including you. Especially you, because you represented the greatest potential for both connection and devastation. Now, in the quiet moments that separation provides, they are confronting the reality of this caring. It arrives uninvited, in the middle of work tasks, during late-night drives, in the silence before sleep. They find themselves thinking of you with an intensity that contradicts every story they told themselves about moving forward. They remember your voice with uncomfortable clarity. They recall specific expressions, the way you looked at them during certain conversations, small gestures of kindness they didn't fully appreciate in the moment. The pretending is becoming exhausting. Not just the pretending to you, but the pretending to themselves. They are realizing that indifference was never genuine. It was a strategy, and like all strategies born of fear, it demanded constant energy to maintain. Now that energy is depleted. The mask has become too heavy, too hot, too suffocating. They are ready, perhaps desperately so, to set it down. But setting down a mask you've worn for years is disorienting. The face beneath feels exposed, vulnerable, unfamiliar. They don't know how to be in the world without the protection they've relied upon. This is where the second card enters the narrative, offering guidance they are slowly learning to accept. Trust the process. 3 words that sound simple until you try to live them. For someone who has always believed that control equals safety, trusting any process feels like freefall. They want to rush, to fix, to make declarations and take actions that will restore connection immediately. The waiting feels like torture. The not knowing feels like failure. Yet something deeper is beginning to whisper to them. They are starting to sense that healing operates on its own timeline, one that doesn't respond to human impatience. The separation between you exists for reasons that extend beyond either of your individual choices. There are lessons here that could only be learned in the space that distance creates. There are patterns that needed to be interrupted, cycles that needed to be broken, perspectives that needed to shift before any reunion could be sustainable. They are learning, sometimes gracefully, often clumsily, to surrender to this timing. They are discovering that their constant pushing, their need to make things happen on their schedule, has been a source of suffering rather than solution. The process is unfolding exactly as it must. Every day of separation is not a day lost but a day invested in the foundation of what might come next. This trust is not passive. It doesn't mean sitting still and hoping for the best. It means showing up for their own growth even when the outcome remains uncertain. It means doing the difficult inner work without guarantee of reward. It means believing that their healing matters regardless of whether it leads back to you or forward into something new. And this work is revealing painful truths. The third card speaks to a recognition that has been emerging slowly, then suddenly, like a wound that finally demands attention. They are seeing with devastating clarity the choices they made when they were still operating from fear rather than love. There was a time, perhaps many times, when they chose others over you. Not necessarily other people in a romantic sense, though that may have been part of it, but other priorities, other voices, other versions of themselves that felt safer or more acceptable. They chose the approval of people who didn't truly know them. They chose the comfort of old patterns over the risk of new ones. They chose the mask over the truth, and in doing so, they chose distance over intimacy. These choices cost them everything that actually mattered. They cost them the trust they had begun to build with you. They cost them the peace that comes from alignment between values and actions. They cost them the future they were too afraid to fully imagine but now cannot stop envisioning. The weight of this recognition is heavy. They carry it through their days, this knowledge of what they sacrificed and why. They understand now that their choices were not random or purely reactive. They were the predictable outcomes of unhealed wounds, of beliefs about worthiness that were formed long before they met you. They didn't choose others because they preferred them. They chose others because they didn't believe they deserved to choose you, didn't believe they could hold something as precious as what you offered. This mistake, this series of mistakes, is becoming their greatest teacher. Not through self-flagellation, which they have practiced enough for a lifetime, but through genuine understanding of how fear operates in their system. They are learning to recognize the moments when old patterns threaten to repeat, learning to pause in that crucial space between stimulus and response, learning to choose differently even when it feels terrifying. And in this learning, they are discovering something that changes everything. The fourth card illuminates what has remained constant through all their confusion, all their poor choices, all their periods of withdrawal and silence. Your love. Your steady, unshakable, North Star love. They didn't understand it at first. Couldn't comprehend how you could remain anchored when they were so obviously adrift. They tested it without meaning to, through their inconsistency, their emotional unavailability, their periods of disappearance. They expected you to mirror their chaos, to become as uncertain as they were, to eventually turn away as others had. But you didn't. You remained. Not in a way that enabled their poor behavior, but in a way that held space for their potential even when they couldn't hold it themselves. Your love wasn't dramatic or demanding. It didn't require them to be different than they were to deserve it. It simply was, constant as the northern star that guides travelers home through the darkest nights. This consistency has become their reference point. When they feel lost, they think of you and remember that some things remain true regardless of circumstances. Your love has taught them what stability feels like, what safety means, what it is to be accepted without having to earn that acceptance through performance or perfection. They see now that your love never wavered, not because you were naive or because you tolerated poor treatment, but because you saw something in them that they couldn't see in themselves. You saw the person beneath the mask, the soul beneath the fear, the possibility beneath the pattern. And you loved that person into clearer view. This recognition is transforming their vision of the future. The fifth card reveals what they want now with a clarity that surprises them. They see you married, not as a fantasy escape from their current reality, but as the natural culmination of a love that has already proven its resilience. They see you settled together, not in the sense of stagnation, but in the sense of finally having a home base from which to explore the world. They imagine peaceful mornings and honest conversations. They imagine building something together that reflects both of your values, your growth, your hard-won wisdom. They imagine introducing you to the parts of their life that matter most, not as someone to impress, but as someone to integrate fully into their world. This vision is not naive. It carries the weight of everything they've learned about how difficult relationships can be, how much work lasting love requires, how easily good intentions can go astray without consistent attention. But it also carries the hope of someone who has finally stopped running from what they want. They want this future with you. They are beginning to believe they might be capable of creating it. The vision itself becomes motivation, pulling them forward through the difficult work of healing and growth. They don't just want the outcome, they want to become the person who can sustain it. This brings us to the sixth card, the awakening that has been building through all the others. The clarity they are experiencing is not comfortable. It is painful in the way that truth often is, stripping away illusions they had clung to for years. But it is also liberating, offering freedom from patterns that have constrained them for as long as they can remember. They finally see what matters. Not in an abstract, philosophical sense, but in the concrete reality of their daily choices and priorities. They see that the approval they once chased is empty compared to genuine connection. They see that the safety they sought through emotional unavailability was actually the most dangerous choice of all, costing them the intimacy they craved. They see you. Really see you, perhaps for the first time. Not as an ideal or a projection, not as a solution to their loneliness or a validation of their worth, but as a real, complex, precious human being who chose to love them despite every reason not to. They see the gift of your patience, the sacrifice of your own needs at times, the strength it took to remain open when they were closed. This seeing changes everything. It reorients their entire life, shifting their compass toward what is true and meaningful rather than what is safe or expected. They are awakening to their own capacity for love, for commitment, for the kind of partnership they once believed was possible only for others. The journey from here is not guaranteed to be smooth. Awakening is not the same as arriving. They will still have moments of fear, instances where old patterns threaten to reassert themselves, days when the weight of their past mistakes feels heavier than their hope for the future. But the fundamental shift has occurred. They cannot unsee what they have seen. They cannot unknown what they now know. And what they know is this: you are worth the risk. Love is worth the vulnerability. The future they want with you is worth every difficult step required to reach it. They are done pretending otherwise, done running from their own heart, done choosing fear over the possibility of everything they have ever wanted. The mask has fallen. The process is being trusted. The mistakes are being owned. Your North Star love continues to guide. The future vision pulls them forward. And through it all, the awakening unfolds, painful, liberating, and absolutely necessary. This is where your story stands now. Not at its end, but at a threshold. The separation that has defined your recent history is serving its purpose, creating the conditions necessary for genuine transformation. What emerges from this period will be different from what existed before, more honest, more grounded, more capable of withstanding the challenges that lasting love inevitably faces. Trust what is unfolding, even when you cannot see the full picture. The connection between you is not broken, it is being rebuilt on foundations that can actually support the weight of real intimacy. And when the time is right, when the work is sufficiently done, when the lessons are sufficiently learned, the space between you will begin to close again, not through force or desperation, but through the natural alignment of two people who have finally become ready for each other.